I'm Yvonne Okwara Matole. Good evening. 3 years ago, Garissa University College was a bloodbath. 148 people, majority of them students, were killed by Al-Shabaab militants who made their way into the education institution just before dawn. The third anniversary of that dark day was marked by a road race in Garissa town today, with the participants, students and lecturers telling of their survival stories and the tight security that is now synonymous with the university. But as Garissa University turns a positive page on the fight against Al-Shabaab, African Union soldiers inside Somalia are mourning. On Sunday, Al-Shabaab attacked an AMISOM base in Lower Shabelle region, 130 kilometers south of Mogadishu. The number of the dead remains a mystery, with AMISOM saying they killed 30 Al-Shabaab militants and lost 4 soldiers in the attack. On the other hand, Al-Shabaab claims they killed tens of Ugandan soldiers at Bulamarere AMISOM army garrison. But the numbers of the dead notwithstanding, the style and timing of the attack has left many wondering why AMISOM is often caught flat-footed with attacks that are now assuming a predictable fashion. The attacks are either staged on or before the anniversary of a major Al-Shabaab attack either in Somalia or in Kenya. And just like in the Elade attack, a truck laden with explosives was driven into the Bulamarere army base. But even as attacks on the AMISOM forces continue, the special representative of the chairperson of the African Union Commission for Somalia, Ambassador Francisco Madera, and the current AMISOM commander, Lieutenant General Jim Besigye, believe Al-Shabaab can be crushed.
Action of AMISOM troops is a source of concern, particularly if it is not accompanied by the requisite force enablers and force multipliers. We need to be able to effectively contain, disrupt, and destroy Al-Shabaab. For that, we need the forces that are required. We need the force enablers and force multipliers so that this work is done properly.
Have to co-locate with Al-Shabaab. We need to fight him, break his backbone, and then finally eradicate him. That's my goal, and I will achieve it.
On the show tonight, I shall be speaking to journalist Patrick Gadara, who has been following the war on terror in the country and beyond. We shall also cross over to our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, who will be speaking to security analysts in the streets of Nairobi. But before we hear from them, let's cross over to Kampala, Uganda, where our correspondent Solomon Serwanja is on standby to tell us how Ugandans are responding to the report of this latest attack on Ugandan soldiers in Somalia. Solomon, what's the latest? What are the authorities there saying, particularly with respect to the numbers of those dead?
Well, let's say that this can be likened to military or war propaganda where the numbers favor the other side. Today, the spokesperson for the Uganda People's Defense Forces, which is also part of the contingent in Somalia, came out to say that the number of Al-Shabaab militants that were killed has risen from 30 to 46. That's the latest figure that the UPDF is giving. Of course, they still claim that only 4 soldiers were killed during the attack. And those numbers actually can be questioned because a lot of the media here is relying on the information that has been given by the Uganda People's Defense Forces. We know that there is a media crew that the UPDF works with, so they always send back the information, and they also give some footage to the media, and also the spokesperson gives their side of the story. As you may well know, that the Al-Shabaab has also since said that they have killed about 30+ number of UPDF soldiers. But away from the military propaganda that is going on both sides, I think it's mixed reactions coming through from the Ugandan audience. Of course, some people saying that it is important to pacify Somalia, but at what cost? I mean, since we went there there are many Ugandans who feel that Somalia should be growing into a man nation to manage its own security situation. Of course, when we hear UPDF soldiers killed on foreign soil, not very many people will appreciate it, but ask any expert in relations to military and they'll tell you that once they can be able to hold the Al-Shabaab in Somalia, it will be difficult for the militias to come down to Uganda and also to Kenya. But also let's look at the fact that the United Nations has given December 2020 as the deadline for the AMISOM troops to pull out of Somalia. And of course, this has been welcomed by some Ugandans, even though the leaders within the East African community, including President Yoweri Museveni and Uhuru Kenyatta, are pleading to the United Nations that this deadline be extended. The question is, yes, we want to ensure that Somalia is peaceful, but this peace certainly is watered by the blood of the men in uniform who are supposed to be protecting the very boundaries of this nation. So I should say that it is mixed reactions. When we talk about the political side, before I come back to you, of course, many people think that the president still wants to maintain a heavy presence of UPDF soldiers within the AMISOM in Somalia because he still wants to be looked at as the big brother of Africa. President Yoweri Museveni, we know very well that when the European Union, the United States of America, and indeed the rest of the European countries look at President Yoweri Museveni as that person who is so Pan-African in nature, but also who can be able to provide soldiers as and when they are needed. So, of course, there's the political side, but there is also the fact that if we let the Al-Shabaab walk free and in Somalia, they can easily transfer their attacks on the rest of East Africa. So it's mixed reactions coming through.
That's right. Thank you very much. Solomon Serwanja, he's our KTN News correspondent in Kampala, Uganda. Thank you for that report on mixed reactions following the news of that attack that took place Sunday in Somalia. All right. So from Kampala, Uganda, let's now come back to Nairobi and go straight to the Central Business District, where our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, is on standby with Byron Adera to speak a little bit more about this latest attack, what it means for the war on terror. Sophia?
Good evening, Yvonne. It was on this day, exactly 3 years ago, early morning, that Al-Shabaab militants attacked Garissa University. 148 left dead, students as well as staff members. The first anniversary following that attack, we saw a monument unveiled there. There were several vigils as well held here in Kenya, as well as other parts of the world, other universities in the world standing in solidarity with Kenya. And then we saw the second anniversary last year, marathon as well held to mark this particular attack. However, this year, just 2 days ago, the Vice Chancellor had indicated they did not want to hold any events because they say having this vigils or whatever events that may be prepared to mark this attack always bring back bad memories, and that they wanted to stay away from that and continue to forge on into what he says is a better environment, a better conducive and gelled not only university and institution but also alongside the community. Remember, at the time there were concerns around information and how that is shared when there are concerns about perhaps individuals who have come into the region that are known or that are suspicious. So he went on ahead to speak of the measures that have been put in place at the university, saying there's a police post that has since been set up with more deployment of police officers. Currently, there is a perimeter wall that's being constructed as well. And you have as well a machinery that has been put at the entrance, biometric gadget that has all the details of students and staff. And this is just in measures to up and increase security there. And also just around the region, they say the residents, locals in Garissa having more confidence in the authorities there and are able to speak freely of concerns that they may have. But also, as you mentioned, that attack in Somalia on that Ugandan military base, again, just coming around this anniversary. And so to talk a little bit more about this, Byron Adera is a pioneer in ex-Kenya Special Forces, as well as a member of Association of Corporate and Industrial Security Management Professionals. Thank you for making time for us tonight. So the third anniversary, the Vice-Chancellor says we're not going to do any events or have any kind of setup to mark this because of the memories. Do you think there needs to be events or something put together just to ensure that at the end of the day there are conversations at least on each anniversary to check where Kenya is at in as far as preparedness? Absolutely, yes. I do agree with the Chancellor's concerns, but I'd say that is not demonstrable of resilience in the face of threats that we're facing. Terror is not going to end here with us today, and so we must remain absolutely strong and focused on the fight. And part of that fight is to show strength in the face of terror. Yeah. And part of that showing strength in the face of terror is to actually forge forward. You'd coin that around what you'd call failing forward. So failing forward, it really entails bringing back those lessons as fresh as they are, as heartful as they are, so we can demonstrate that we are actually not only committed to fighting, but we're also committed to carrying on, forward also the lessons that are very vital for the encouragement, motivation, and maybe commitment for the key players that are fighting this terror. Yeah. Yes. So the third anniversary being marked today, and then that attack yesterday in Somalia, coincidence, or would you agree with those who say there's a pattern emerging around anniversaries of big attacks, that Al-Shabaab always seeks to send another message with another attack? Definitely, yes. There's a strong message that the Al-Shabaab are sending out there. And if you ask anybody who's worth their salt or great analysis in terms of what the security landscape is like, there are several patterns that we can draw to what happened in the past. If anything, this would play in the grand scheme of things and in the whole marketplace of ideas, the impact of the same would play out very positively for them to create maximum publicity, maximum tremendous psychological pressure and stress on the victims and on the relatives and indeed in the populace and the society in which we are as a whole, probably even to AMISOM, that we can do this again and in the same pattern and share of colors. The whole objective that's going to be achieved at the end of the day is that this going to also discredit the government efforts and also paint the government in bad light. And you and me and the populace that should ideally be solidly behind this may be feeling like we do not need to be here after all. And war by extension is an extension of politics by other means. So if they achieve that and the government goes like, we ideally need to actually draw down forces and eventually maybe also leave, what that's going to support is the narrative which the terrorists actually are in support of. Yeah. Of course, they want to, place Sharia law in Somalia, and what that's going to do to the government is discredit that government, destabilize it. Terror threats are going to continue, possibly even multiply, and me and you are not going to be safe in any space of the world. Ideally, terrorism is a global threat. It's not just in Somalia. So interpretation in a small space, and possibly with the narrow and misguided strategic concerns, may not engender success and holistic success at the end of the day. Yeah, and looking at this again attack by Al-Shabaab on a Ugandan base in Somalia, and in light of what we saw with a Kenyan camp, Elade, are you surprised that AMISOM appears to not have learned lessons, or is it that terrorism is just one of those things, no matter what you do, there's always going to be that opening? Okay, precipitous failures are always judged side by side when you're looking at sometimes catastrophic patterns of behavior. It could be on one constituent part of the force, it could be on the whole part of the force. But I'd say this in the same breath, that AMISOM has made tremendous gains. And me and you are now safe in this street because ideally we do not have as much attacks on the urban setups as they used to be before. And that is one of the gains. Apart from what we see in some places like Boni Forest and Mandera Wajir area, we have several pacified areas deep inside Somalia and several other places. That ideally would play into the support that the AMISOM is actually committed to. Yeah. And there's been a concern around sharing of information that the locals, especially with the Elade, you remember at the time, a whole village being evacuated, the Kenyan camp nearby, stays put until this attack happens. Do you think there's more responsibility on local residents, whether it's here, whether it's in Somalia with the residents there? Is there usually a shortfall? Because you hear it's about whether it's confidence or trust issues, mistrust, if you like, between the authorities and residents. Absolutely, yes. War fighting is complex and it's a multifaceted affair. It's not only on the troops on the ground that are doing this job, but how much the society, be it those guys that are in the war theater itself, but the national will, that's me and you, brothers and sisters, those who are fighting that war, and how much we are actually in support of the same. Now, having said that then,
the kind of behavior that we did see with the locals in Somalia actually plays very dysfunctionally to what should be happening with guys that you go out to help. They shouldn't bite that finger that helps them. If anything, they should be sharing that intelligence. They should be absolutely up in arms against those that are disrupting that peace and security in that space. But there's so many things that you'd consider. Magaji, 1982, talked about the algebra of aggression, and there's so many societal, a vast array of societal matters, their aspirations, the external contributors to them wanting to get into acts of aggression, and how much they don't support that narrative. It's an ideological war by and large, and if you do not win the hearts and minds of the people, you may not be having that goodwill to draw intelligence from. Perhaps even your actions may contribute to you not having this good news at the end of the day. Perhaps you go out there and you done your business, which has brush shoulders the wrong way or grab people the wrong way, and they may not be feeling empowered. If anything, they may be feeling incentivized to not help at the end of the day. Yeah. Those are all the vast array of things that have got to be looked at side by side as you continue on to this, towards eventual success. Yeah. So the hearts and minds of the people are got to be won as best as even the war fighting against the terrorists itself.
What about information following such attacks, the flow of the same? Largely we see contradictory statements. The authorities will say this, the terrorists will say something else. For instance, on Elade, we still do not have a lot of what really happened, a clear picture. And the authorities, governments will always argue you do not want to play into the narrative of the terrorists that they've won big. How do you balance that?
It's a walk on a tightrope in very shifty wind, both for the operators and the people that are consuming this kind of information. A family hit by a very hardcore information when they actually are pointed in a different direction may not be very empowered to feel encouraged to support those efforts. Now, having said that, I know there's so much disinformation that hangs around. But then again, look at it from the perspective of what the terrorists would want to achieve with disinformation, one, and two, a propaganda kind of campaign that will not support me and you and the operators that are trying to fight this. I'm not in support, obviously, of the fact that people are going to be kept in the dark, because there are families that would want to have closure, and closure is partly based on being told the truth about what basically went down. Now, there are very many, what I call lost lessons, and where missteps, maybe breakdown in channels that are supposed to pass very vital information, maybe delusional attitudes, maybe just bad leadership qualities. As I said, war is a very complex thing, and there's it is very high liability, first of all, because if you have missteps, then people may die. People actually have had to die. When you and me have had that intelligence available and people did not act on it appropriately, that should not be the news that would encourage anybody or even the players themselves. Tactical and technical proficiency is something that's not strategically important, but it must actually be done to ensure survivability. Passage of information, which is basically within what we call thoroughness in awareness of the tactical situation, should be not only available to the forces that are there operating, but guys who may want to come in and who may be forced to actually jump in to support. So talking about operational mutuality, you may want to think about how so many people and so many forces coming from different backgrounds may be feeling if they do not have that operational homogeneity between each other. That in itself is not team. If you do not have people in a team playing, like in the beehive society, so everybody's on the same page in a beehive society, and every bee right there is beating its wings and doing everything in the same team. Now, that is supported by very flawless lines of communication, so passage and sharing of intelligence, probably even comparing notes as to how operationally can be in both tactics, training, doctrines, everything that informs your business in there. Now, if that is lacking, then you may not want to think about building operational interdependencies and consistencies that may engender flawlessness in the way you conduct your operations and the flawlessness in the way you want to get to the end of achieving your mission.
All right. Finally, here in Kenya, we've seen some quarters call for our troops to come back home. The UN giving a 2020 deadline for AMISOM to wrap up. Some governments saying that is not tenable. There's still so much work to be done. What are your thoughts on that?
That may not be grounded on sound strategy. 2020 is in the next 2 years. We don't have any hope that the Al-Shabaab are going to be discouraged to carry out spectaculars, both in and outside Somalia. We may not have any hope in thinking that the Al-Shabaab may throw in the towel and lift up their hands in the air and become saints the following day. That may not happen. But if you consider that side by side with what we are trying to achieve in Somalia, apart from the peace, the operation, offensive operation, we want to achieve a peace building and lasting Somalia, then that's self-sustaining. That is grounded on building a strong military. The Somali National Army has got to have its hand held through this operational maturity program. And that can only happen if they are shadowed by guys who experience and shadowed by guys who they can learn from, as the big brother. That is not maybe gaining as much traction as we'd wish to happen, but obviously the forces, all the troop contributing countries, Kenya, Ethiopia, Rwanda, you're talking Uganda, are playing really, really hard to get there. So that is something that's not going to be achievable in the next 2 years. It's not realistic. And the international community have got to actually understand that the first beneficiaries of, if you wish, that kind of drawback and the plan, which is lacking in strategic soundness, is the troop contributing countries. So it's going to be Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and everybody else that's going to wrap up and go back home based on a false premise.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Byron Adara, pioneer and ex-Kenya Special Forces officer with us tonight. Yvonne.
Onuna, thank you very much, and thanks to Byron Adera as well. Let's now look at some facts on this latest attack on AMISOM forces that happened yesterday. Before we have a chat with Patrick Gadara on the same. Well, this is what we know, that heavily armed Al-Shabaab militants attacked an African Union military camp that is in the Bulomaria district, which is about 150 kilometers south of Mogadishu, where peacekeepers from Uganda are stationed. The militants initially detonated 2 suicide car bombs that hit 1 AU vehicle and 1 Somali military vehicle. Then a large number of Al-Shabaab fighters began firing from under the trees. Militants who were on foot then attacked 2 other camps in nearby villages. This is according to the deputy governor of the Lower Shabelle region, where the base is located. And then let's talk a little bit about the numbers now. The Ugandan Army spokesman, Brigadier Richard Karemire, tweeted that 30 Al-Shabaab militants who had attacked the base had all been killed. However, the spokesman for Al-Shabaab, Abdiaziz Abu Musab, said 14 of the group's fighters and 59 AMISOM troops were killed in the incident. But take a look at the AMISOM statement now, and I read it in part. The troops fought off and successfully repulsed the terrorists who had launched simultaneous attacks in Kuriole, Bulomaria, and Goldwyn. The militants were dealt a heavy blow, with at least 30 of them put out of action following intense fighting. 8 vehicles which ferried the terrorists, including 2 vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices, were destroyed, and an assortment of weapons were recovered. Unfortunately, AMISOM lost 4 gallant soldiers in the fighting, with 6 others sustaining injuries. That is the statement from AMISOM on this latest attack that took place just yesterday on Ugandan forces who were part of the AMISOM troops in Somalia, that is in south of Mogadishu in the Lower Shabelle region. Patrick Gadara is with me this evening on The Big Story. Patrick, before we take a quick break, I'd just like you to weigh in on this one. Here we are again, yet another attack, seemingly similar MO. What are your thoughts around this now?
It is similar in some respects, but dissimilar in others. There were actually 3 attacks, as you mentioned. It was on 3 bases. So Kuriole, Bulomaria, which is the largest one, and Goldwyn. And we rarely see this sort of coordinated attack on separate bases, at least not recently. It hasn't happened. And on 3, I don't think I've had that before. 2 of them seem to be diversionary attacks, to be quite honest. The big takeaway for me from this is that the attack was actually repulsed. If you compare with what has happened in other forward operating bases, Ugandans in Janale, Burundians when they were hit in Lego, Kenya in Elade, all these were overrun with large numbers of casualties. But this seems to have been repulsed, which kind of, to me, suggests that AMISOM is actually learning some lessons and is doing more or a better job of defending its troops in these bases.
Okay, yeah, dissimilar in that respect. But, what does this tell us? Because, like we said, there were 3 attacks. Are we reading too much into it to say that this is a somewhat new strategy, having some diversionary attacks?
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily a new one. I think you've had perhaps a few in the distant past, but not recently. But in my view, the thing to really focus on was the response from AMISOM. And I think that is what is telling. The base was not overrun. It was actually a pretty big base. Compared with what was happening last year and the year before, with these forward operating bases where they were manned by like 120 people, etc. Bulemarel had somewhere around 350. So they were equipped to defend themselves. The MO, as you mentioned, from Shabab was the same in terms of the actual attack on the base, where they go and explode a car bomb, and then you've got people who were meant to sort of rush into the base in the confusion. That doesn't seem to have happened. One other thing is to note is, again, there's dispute about the casualty figures. Mm-hmm. This, I think, is where the weakness of AMISOM and of its constituent combat units from the various countries is. Because they haven't invested in their credibility, so that when they come to fight on the media space, in the propaganda space, their word is not taken as truth. Many times they're being caught lying. Many times they're being caught minimizing incidents when they've actually suffered more casualties. So even now when they say it's just 4, kind of people are taking it with a pinch of salt, and there is obviously the narrative from Shabab, which suggests that up to 59 might have been killed. Shabab are also known to kind of like to exaggerate figures in this. But I think in all, it seems to me like the attack was repulsed. It doesn't seem to have been an occupation of the base. So at least to that sense, I think, to that extent, I think AMISOM have acquitted themselves pretty well.
Yeah, and we will come back, Gadara, and talk a little bit more about winning the propaganda war, and if that is something that we need to focus on, all the member countries of AMISOM, and why that is important in this war against terror. We'll also talk about this is the 3rd anniversary of the Garissa University attack. We'll talk about why that was quiet and what your thoughts are on that. This is The Big Story here on KTN News. We're taking a quick break. We'll be right back.